I'm Haley Taylor, and you're listening to the Rough Draft Diaries. This week on the Rough Draft Diaries, we'll have yet another phone interview. Our interviewee this time was busy in Washington. It's Representative Marcy Kaptur. She's currently serving her 18th term in the House of Representatives. She's a member of the Democratic Party, and she's the longest-serving woman currently in the House. In Congress, she's tied for the second longest-serving woman with Senator Barbara Boxer. They both began serving in 1983. But we are going to start this episode of the Rough Draft Diaries well before 1983, mainly because Marcy's political career began well before that time. You could say it started with her parents. Although they were not politically inclined, they ran a small grocery store in Toledo, Ohio. They encouraged Marcy to participate in the local Toledo community, but also to pay attention to what was happening nationally. So at the age of 13, she was volunteering at voting centers while listening intently to the words of the current president.
We had a president, John Kennedy, who was quite an articulate and visionary leader. He talked about, ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country. And I heard that call. Didn't know what it meant, but I wanted to help my country. I actually had tried to get into the Air Force Academy in Colorado Springs and was rejected because I was a woman. I never thought much about that back then. But it was on my mind that I wanted to serve my country. I thought, well, maybe I'll work for the FBI, and I wrote them a letter, and they didn't hire women. And so I was always kind of looking around, trying to figure out what's the next step.
Well, the next step for Marcy was college. But choosing which school to go to was easier said than done, as it usually is.
Nobody in our family had ever graduated from high school or college, so they really didn't have any recommendations on where to go to college. So Dad knew about the Notre Dame football team. And he said, well, what about Notre Dame? I said, oh, well, hey, yeah, let me apply there. Well, I got rejected from there, too, because in those days they didn't accept women. Back then, I didn't really think, oh, well, they rejected me because I'm a woman. It was just like, okay, so now what do I do? Okay, so I didn't get that, so now what?
Well, Marcy graduated from St. Ursula Academy in 1964 and then received her undergraduate degree from the University of Wisconsin-Madison in 1968. She focused on urban studies. She then became a city planner in Lucas County, working her way up to join President Carter's staff at the White House as one of his 3 urban advisors. Kaptur left the White House in the late 70s and began her postgraduate studies in urban planning at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, MIT. That's in 1981. She thought she would become a teacher, even though her friends back in Toledo tried to convince her otherwise.
Got a call from some of my local friends, and they asked me, would you consider running for Congress? And I said, what? It wasn't really what I was thinking about. I was thinking about getting my doctorate, but I ultimately ran for office because I met one of my friends from grade school when Mom and I were at the supermarket, and this friend of mine from grade school was out of work, and there were so many people out of work in the Toledo area. She really became the person that, as a result of listening to her story, I thought, wow, maybe I should think about running.
So Marcy changed her mind, and she ran for office in 1982, winning against Republican Ed Weber. Not only was her win historic, but simply running for Congress was historic. Marcy was the first woman to run for Congress in the Northwest Ohio region. But she is quick to mention she was not the only one affecting change in the demographic of local political leaders.
We had many women in the Toledo area who had run for various offices. Judge Geraldine McElwain had been one of our distinguished common pleas judges. We had women like Senator Mary Jean Valaquette, who had been a state senator. Women had been active on city council, not large numbers, but it wasn't unknown. People had to get used to the thought. It was kind of like a kaleidoscope, it kind of shifts, and people have to get used to the new configuration. So many people helped me, men and women, because they wanted to change America for the better, too.
So here we are 18 terms later, and Marcy continues to split her time between the city she grew up in, Toledo, and the city her career took her, Washington. And although it doesn't seem like she is slowing down anytime soon, she has reached a point in her career where she is able to look back to the beginning of that journey and find advice to give to the next generation of young leaders.
To think very hard about what draws your energy forward, what your vocation is, not what your work will be. If you don't do what you're called to do, you will not be a happy person and you will not succeed. get through high school, whatever it takes. If you have to get a tutor or whatever, get that high school degree. And then think hard about what you're going to do after high school, but get to know yourself. To educate means to draw forth from yourself, to learn what your strengths are. And every person is different than the person next to them. And growing up means figuring out what your talents are. And sometimes you can't know that when you're younger. And I think what happens is the current generation is drowned in media. They sometimes don't take the time to listen to the silent call that only comes from inside themselves. Give yourself the great joy of becoming what you are meant to be.
I'm Haley Taylor, and thanks for listening to this episode of the Rough Draft Diaries. Marcy's choices for the next episode of the Rough Draft Diaries include...
Well, one would be Vaughn Duvalac, who is in charge of all the community gardens in Toledo for Toledo Grows. I think also annually I do a congressional arts competition with a company called Libby Glass. And finally, the third one would be speaking with Rebecca Singer and some of the companies that we've been able to help launch working through the Center for Innovative Food Technology, which is located out on Airport Highway. So I would say those would be three of the topical areas and people that I think would be interesting for you.
Make sure to tune in next time to find out who I pick on the Rough Draft Diaries.